And the Masters of the Universe.
As Season 1 of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe continued,
Of course, you fool!
the writers, artists, and production personnel at Filmation worked hard to expand the world of Eternia. New heroic characters and dastardly villains were featured,
Nothing to it.
Come on!
and some surprisingly serious and scary stories were created.
Brave, you clod! That was nothing for He-Man!
For a series which already broke new ground in the animation business, the creators of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe were also breaking the rules. Now, you will hear the origins of the spectacular stories that concluded Season 1, from the writers and artists who created our adventures. You have the power to know the stories of He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Part 2.
I wrote a show called The Dragon's Gift. I'll get into the plot in a minute. The name of the dragon, Granomir, does come from a role-playing supplement that I wrote for Flying Buffalo in Arizona. It was called The Isle of Dark Smoke, and there was a dragon inside this complex whose name was Granomir. And since I needed a name, I said that's as good as any other. And it's my character. You have a super strong character in He-Man. You have a very powerful character. Certainly Skeletor has been handed his head by He-Man 70 million times. Not a problem. We know He-Man's going to beat guys like that. And I wanted to put him up against something he could not beat physically. Right? So I said, well, dragon.
Silence. I did not say I respected the name, only that I had heard it. Dragons pay little attention to the lies of legend.
Dragon's the biggest thing I can think of. If I do one that talks and also uses magic, I got He-Man pretty well covered.
I am Teil, captain of the Royal Guard, and I will speak as I please.
We shall see how your tongue wags when my magic sends you to the realm of demons.
So the whole point of that episode is He-Man cannot beat the dragon. No way. If there's a fight between the dragon and He-Man, the dragon is going to win. That's obvious. It's obvious to He-Man. And that he has to make a sacrifice at some point. He has to really negotiate with the dragon as opposed to fighting. This was against all the rules of He-Man. He-Man was supposed to go out and beat the heck out of everything that got in his way. Couldn't do it with this dragon, so he had to find other things. I really love that show. I have a thing for dragons. I always did. I like negotiating with a large, intelligent beast. And I can get really sarky and sarcastic with dialogue. When I was writing The Dragon's Gift, this was a dragon. He could say anything he wanted.
Where is my gift?
We don't have it.
But you agreed.
Skytree, in fact any tree, has as much right to life as you or me or Man-at-Arms.
It appealed to people because Skeletor wasn't in it at all. Another rule broken.
Or send us to the realm of demons. Now.
Skeletor was the main villain. You had to show him all the time.
It would.
Wisdom, compassion, and the honoring of a bargain.
We used to call it the Skeletor syndrome. It's like every day Skeletor had a plot and He-Man would beat the heck out of him in the plot. And I said, like, that's going to go for 5 episodes and then it's going to become terrifically boring to people if we don't go somewhere else. So I went somewhere else. I said, it doesn't have to be Skeletor. He doesn't have to have the plot. It doesn't even have to be a plot that's bad. In this sense, the dragon was a good guy and came back later on as a good guy. The Dragon's Gift was my calling card at Filmation, and I'm still proud of it. I think that was it's my best episode.
This is where He-Man has to go after the thing that will tempt you into ultimate evil and not give it up, and he's being tested to see whether he's been worthy. Yeah, that's called The Lord of the Rings. Yeah, a variation on the same. That was a fan favorite, probably because it was strong on character. My point, exactly. Also, as I recall, it's a very simple story.
I could rid the entire universe of evil. Nothing could stop me. No one would dare oppose my will. Whatever I want, I could have.
He goes on a quest. He's got to get to it before Skeletor gets to it. And so it's just a simple quest that's a race against time. You got a ticking clock because you got Skeletor after it. You have obstacles because Skeletor's going to throw all sorts of obstacles in He-Man's way. But basically simple, very linear A, B, C with a big twist at the end. Those often make for the best character story.
Rule? To rule the universe.
If the plot is too convoluted or too fancy or doubles back on itself too much or whatnot, it's hard to get character material in there. You almost want kind of a straight clothesline to hang your character beats on.
To stop you, Skeletor.
So I have to assume that that's a fan favorite because it's strong on character.
And I'm no better than you are.
Was there a temptation to take it, to make He-Man's temptation to the darkness, to the evil side, stronger than it was? I'm sure I would have pushed him right to the edge if it had been me. I would have had him right on the edge of the cliff. I have a feeling I didn't do it because I knew they wouldn't let me get away with it.
You see, some time ago you were given great powers. So great, in fact, that from time to time it is necessary to test your virtue. That is why I myself allowed Skeletor to learn of the Star Seed's location.
You did? But why?
Because by refusing to use the power of the Star Seed, even on one as evil as Skeletor, He-Man has proved himself truly worthy of his powers.
There's some man-woman frisson, and I can't believe I'm using the word frisson in respect to He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, but a certain amount of man-woman frisson with the Sorceress and Adam and Teila. And I mean, usually in a show like that you don't have a lot of female characters, but I mean there was a pretty strong population of female characters, so it sort of made sense to go to an Amazonian society and kind of take a look at that.
Whoa!
What I wouldn't give for a decent road map of this place. Teila!
Adam! Oh, am I glad to see you?
In The Trouble with Arcadia, I used the number 8956. Many years earlier, that was the address of a house I lived in Laurel Canyon when I first moved out here. And it was 8956, and I'm not going to say which street it was, but it was, I got a better one than that. I got one I did like that where I didn't even know I did it. In my Wonder Woman episode that had Ted Shackelford and Joan Van Ark coming from the future to the present, they come from the year 2155, and I just picked that number out of a hat. And after the show aired, when it aired and it came up as a super on the screen, I went, that's my birthday, 2155. I didn't even realize I'd done it.
I wanted to write a horror episode. That was it. And because I was already working on this Lovecraftian thing, I wanted to write something Lovecraftian with cyclopean things and dark magicians and all this stuff going on.
Nothing to be afraid of, she said. Nothing.
Rise! Rise! Take your sacrifice and spread the living darkness across the world!
Not afraid. Not afraid!
Chakotay, stop it! Away, boy!
We're free.
So magic and horror were the two things I was looking for. But when I did the episode, they said it's just too expensive unless we make it a two-parter, so can you write a little more about it? I couldn't write a second half of it because it was the second half. It had a beginning and an ending. So I wrote another episode, and I have to admit that episode, it doesn't really jive. It's hard going the other way. It's when you know where you're going and you get there. You get there, now you go back and see where you came from. Is what they were really asking me to do, say, oh, well, let's see more of where we came from. So I created the mask and everybody that was in Chakotay Part 1. Chakotay Part 2 was really what I had written, but they needed the other. They said, we can't make it unless you do it. And that was one of the few two-parters made on He-Man, unless you amortize the cost by doing it. And they liked it so much they wanted to do it. And a lot of fans say, boy, that scared me when I was a kid. And I said, geez, that's great. I hope you had nightmares. You know, not that I wanted to drive them crazy, but that's the whole idea of writing a scary thing, is to scare people. And it was scary, and it was atmospheric. I'm blowing my own horn, but Ram Man was funny as all get out in House of Shakota. His particular dumbness really worked for me in that one. He became my favorite character kind of after that, because Ram Man was really totally dumb, you know. The man with the head of lead, we used to call him.
Uh-oh, another illusion.
I got the idea for Double-Edged Sword. There had been a lot of talk about violence in children's television, and you know, He-Man had gone out of its way to try to send good messages about violence and when it's justified and when it isn't, or if it's justified. And you know, I decided, why don't I hit this idea head on? Rather than dance around it, why don't I absolutely focus a story on the issue of when and if it's appropriate to use violence? That became a big challenge because really, some people are pacifists and think violence is never justified. Other people, probably most people, think violence is justified in self-defense, and there's a whole broad spectrum of philosophies about violence in our culture. And the challenge of television is you have to write for a mass audience. So the way I decided to hit it was not to make a value statement about whether violence was right or wrong, but to try to put violence in a context that there are consequences.
I'd give anything if this had never happened.
Right or wrong, I couldn't say, but it was important to me that kids understood that there are very serious consequences to violence. That was the whole thought process that went on in my mind before I even started writing the story for Double-Edged Sword. It was thematically driven.
Many years ago, I could walk, run, play ball, just like you.
Chad was very much a surrogate for the audience. And you know, my concern with kids watching the show is, and any show, not just He-Man, this is true of any show that portrays action on television, you know, they tend to glorify action, and they tend to show action in a way where people don't get hurt, and it's just fun and cool, and I want to be a soldier, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, Chad was supposed to be a kid who was consumed with how much fun it seemed like to fight. And I really wanted to send the message that whether you fight or not is a hard decision to make, but it's never fun. That was the message of Double-Edged Sword, and Chad was indeed the recipient of the message and the surrogate for the audience that I hoped would receive that message. Double-Edged Sword at the end references death, and the thing that's interesting about animation writing, certainly in that era, is that was a big taboo in animation writing. You were never ever supposed to mention, reference, or show death. It was just considered too upsetting for the target audience that we were aiming for. But you know, every now and then there's an episode or an appropriate context where our advisor, such as Don Roberts or Gordon Berry and Fat Albert, would basically support a reference to death because it was necessary to make a very compelling point. And I think Double-Edged Sword was one of those exceptions where it was considered okay to mention it because the point being made was you know, such an important and powerful one.
Later, I pulled myself out of the rubble. My legs were paralyzed. I would never walk again. But I was one of the lucky ones. Many didn't come out at all.
Another thing about Double-Edged Sword that I'm pleased even today to realize is that I included a character that was disabled. One of the protagonists was in a wheelchair, which we made into a jet chair because it's Eternia and everything has to be fantastical.
Hey there, Chad. Why the long face?
Oh, it's the scatter ray. How am I ever going to join the Royal Guard if I can't aim straight?
Maybe you aren't cut out to be a soldier.
I was pleased to sort of show a positive image of somebody who'd been disabled.
Sometimes movies and television adventure series like this one make it seem as though shooting a gun, fighting, and taking chances are fun and exciting things to do. And what's more, the good guys never get hurt. But in real life, people do get hurt, even killed when they fight or use guns.
You know, the tag for Double-Edged Sword had He-Man actually reveal that he was an animated character and sort of talk about the fact that this was a fiction and the sort of differentiation, if you will, between fantasy and reality. And you know, that's a very important point for very young kids, and it's one of the One of the ways we that produce cartoons justify when we do show action and things that could be dangerous or perhaps unhealthy, we always justify it by saying our audience realizes that this is a fantasy and they're able to differentiate. And the point of that tag, because again, this message was such an important one, and I just felt so strongly that I wanted to hit this message home. I really wanted to help kids understand, and Don Roberts, supported this and loved this idea, but the difference between watching something on television and how you behave in real life.
Make-believe can be fun, and there's nothing wrong with imagining great adventures. But never forget that when it's the real thing, someone can get hurt. Even the good guys. Even you.
Sure, I remember things about it. I've done that on like 3 or 4 other shows. I did it on a Space Ghost. I did it on Mighty Orbots. Space Ghost was actually with a Phoenix, a Firebird. It's one of my favorite plots is the thing that looks like it's really valuable contains this thing inside. It's actually an egg and it contains a thing inside it, which you can't keep because it will be very dangerous to you if you keep a baby griffin. So that's what I remember about that show. One of my favorite plots.
It's afraid of water.
So's the baby. He-Man, do something to help it.
The only thing I can say about City Beneath the Sea, it's something I never wanted to write. I had a thing about underwater shows. City Beneath the Sea was an underwater show, obviously. And they said, well, we want to do an underwater show. And I said, oh, I really don't like underwater stuff. There's not much I can tell you about that one, except it's something I probably could have done a better job on, just because it's not part of it's part of the mythical genre, but it's not a part I ever wanted to deal with.
It's worse, no.
Driel's Return, actually, I think that was actually, the genesis of that was the desire to have a song. I think we wanted to have a song. And so I think I concocted this whole story so the denouement, the critical moment, could be a song. And I think that's where this whole idea of the Horn of Evil came from, as I recall. But I wanted to revisit Tralla, and I wanted to revisit Driel. And I mean, that was a character I had really fondness for from having written Dawn of Dragoon. One of the fun parts about Driel's Return was that I had to force Lou Scheimer to sing in the voice of Orko, because Lou, of course, did the voice of Orko. It was processed. I love Lou, and he has many, many talents, but God help him, singing isn't one of them.
In Eye of the Beholder, did I find it ironic that the story preaches that beauty is on the inside, only to have the ugly guy emerge from the water, transformed into a beautiful... Yeah, I suppose you can make the argument that it was ironic. Film, and this is film after all, is an external medium. You have to externalize everything. Therefore, what you are seeing when you're seeing that transformation is you are seeing the inner beauty coming out and expressing itself from inside all the way clear through to the out. So it's to me it's not ironic, because to me it's just an expression of the inner beauty. And you got to visualize it because it's a visual medium.
Himself for nothing.
No sacrifice is for nothing if it helps other people, Skeletor. And your selfishness will be your own undoing.
Now, a lot of people really look for a transformation sequence looking shot, and this one comes from the episode Quest for the Sword. Right after He-Man gets his sword back, he raises it, and there's sort of a little sparkling effect that happens here. And so this is a really nice shot of He-Man in the traditional transformation pose, where the camera would pan up and show the sword exploding with power. This is a pan shot, an upright pan shot. Well, the camera, of course, would crop it off right about here. In fact, there's a line showing where it cropped, which is right here, and the camera just panned up. This is also a stock shot that you would see quite often, of course, in every episode where he would transform. You would see a shot like this, and so it was already Xeroxed in case they would need it. And I guess the person who was painting this decided that they would just go ahead and paint the rest of it down below, even though it was only going to be used from about here up.
I went to talk to Arthur, and he was very nice, and gave me the Bible, and I went home and I wrote all this, just 40 or 50 ideas. I was very young and very green, and I had 40 ideas for what He-Man should do. And I went in and I pitched them to Arthur the following week or 2 weeks later or whenever it was, and he said, well, let's do this one, which turned out to be the Castle of Heroes. And that's how I got into He-Man.
Castle of Heroes was kind of fun because being a history cuckoo, when we had to like recreate Blackbeard and I forgot what was some of the other historical figures. I could sort of like show off a little bit with what I knew about the design of the different characters.
The thing that I remember most was in the Castle of Heroes, there are all these bad guys from the planet Earth, and one of them is Blackbeard the Pirate. And when I wrote Blackbeard the Pirate, I had assumed that he would look a lot like Robert Newton, with the long coat and the big buttons and the hat, and "Arr, matey" kind of thing. Now, when he showed up on the episode, he had the "Arr, matey" kind of voice, but he looked sort of like he'd just fallen out of a Flash Gordon episode. He had the little tights and the mask, and it wasn't right.
Aye, you'll be finding me, Blackbeard the Pirate.
And me, Hannibal, mighty warrior.
What do you want?
It ain't what we be wanting, matey, but what Mr. Montague wants. Let's shove off.
Sounds like a good idea. Come on, Orko. We'll play their game until we find out what's going on.
Montague was Skeletor's friend who came and wanted to collect He-Man and make him the head of his intergalactic terrible bad guy army. I was really surprised what he looked like. I thought he'd be a little taller, and he ended up looking on the TV sort of like a frog. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. He did not look dangerous, and I think that was part of what they had in mind, is that he should not look dangerous. Montague, it seems to me that the hero of Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury's novel, wasn't his name Montague? Something like that. It was something, anyway, this is what it was in my head, and I always liked that name, and I thought, well, I'll just slap it on here. And that's what I did. Sorry, Ray. But I really liked the idea of somebody coming from the outside. I wanted to see if I could make Skeletor root for He-Man, and that I succeeded in. So maybe there was a little character stuff going on, but it was Skeletor's character rather than the good guys. That's what it was, basically. I needed to create somebody for Skeletor to push against, and that was Montague.
I'm very particular, you know.
Did I ever sneak anything into the storyboards? Yeah, once in a while you do something. It'd be fun. In fact, in one of my first shows in Castle of Heroes, I had this scene that at the beginning, Skeletor has all his bad guys at their conference table, and they're having their meeting about what they're going to do. And I had this long section of dialogue where Skeletor just seemed to be talking for this inordinately a long amount of time. And I had that character Clawful, whose hands were like lobster claws. And at one point, while Skeletor was talking, we cut away to Clawful, and Clawful's sitting like this. And that got cut. And Hal Sutherland said, "Are you trying to be funny, Cito? Is this satire?" Like, I'm sorry.
why is Evelyn in this cave with Skeletor? What's her connection to him? You know, like, why isn't she off, you know, being a villainess on her own? You know? Why, you know, Teil is the warrior girl. You know, why? That's sort of a question. You know, Adam and He-Man are pretty much, you know, set. There was not a lot you could do with Adam. Usually when you saw him, he was just sort of, you know, Bruce Wayne, Don Diego type guy. He didn't really have dark moments off to himself when he was questioning his fate, or at least not too often. There just seemed to be a little more leeway and more of a chance to tell a story with him. And Skeletor, you know, from the get-go, there wasn't a lot you could do with him because he's like, I want to take over Eternia, I want Castle Grayskull. So you were never able to really do Shakespearean moments with him where he's questioning his villainy or why he's doing this or his motivations. So, you know, with the villain, with him, it was sort of like, almost like a hands-off policy. He is who he is. So, you know, do I want to tell another story with Orko feeling bad because they forgot his birthday or something, or do I want to try and tell another story with the female characters and maybe broaden them a little bit?
You know I'll have to stop you. I know you'll try. Too bad, really. We make a nice team, you and I. In a strange way, we do.
The Return of Granomir, I did in fact bring back the dragon from Dragon's Gift, and that was lots of fun for me. I really enjoyed bringing Granomir back. He was a good character, and people were asking to have him brought back, and so they said, can you bring him back? And I said, yeah, no problem, I can bring him back anytime. Really, really enjoyed that script.
But I did not invite you.
This is my friend, Man-at-Arms, the one you saved when we first met. He wanted to thank you in person.
Poor excuse for bad manners.
But I didn't mean to be rude. Please accept my apology and my thanks.
At least you speak with respect.
I wouldn't speak any other way to one as grand as you.
You show good sense for a human. You may stay.
Thank you again.
And now, the reason for my invitation.
Hanzo the Game Master, again, you know, purely a pulp premise, you know, the evil overlord having, you know, forcing heroes to fight. I'm sure there's been a little bit of everything from, you know, old Roman gladiator stories to Star Trek episodes where Kirk has to fight the Gorn, you know, everything, you know. Hero and a bad guy fighting for the amusement of a tyrant. You know, it's a classic. You got to go with that for an action story.
Your opponent is Kragox the Terrible. You can see how he earned that name.
Until our next exciting adventure, goodbye for now.
One of the interesting things about the Castle of Heroes was that I wrote it on a typewriter, not even an electric typewriter. We're talking about a manual Remington quiet writer, which is all I had. And I typed it up, and I had the right format, and of course I turned it in, and they said, well, you have to make changes, which is fine. I knew that I would have to make changes. So I got it back, and I saw what the changes were. Because I did not have a computer, and I couldn't turn it in, they wanted it like 3 days later. And I couldn't even copy it over in 3 days. So what I needed to do was I actually physically cut and paste with a scissors and tape. And when I turned it in, it looked like a doily. And so I gave it to the secretary. Very nice lady. I don't remember her name. I wish I did. But she was very nice, and she looked at it like this, and she said, don't ever do it again. And that's when I went to my dad and asked him for $2,000 so I could buy a computer. And after that, things were easier.
In Double-Edged Sword, I paired Trapjaw and Merman. You know, we sort of had a assortment of villains that we could pick from and choose from and put together. I don't know why, but Trapjaw and Merman both just made me laugh. Their names made me laugh, their looks made me laugh, thought their voices were terrific. And I really wanted to have some good comedy in Double-Edged Sword because it was such a heavy message, you know, and it was a far more serious episode than that I'm used to, I typically would write. And so it was really important to me to have a lot of broad comedy to just balance it. And Trap Jaw and Merman were perfect for that. I think there was a line that Merman had where he says, "It's so dry here. They're in the desert somewhere," and he's like an old guy, on a vacation he's not enjoying, complaining about the weather. I mean, it was fun. It was fun to have griping villains.